Well, before we complete this section on the denial of that each person is fully God and Arius' ideas related to what he was talking about, let's just briefly touch on two ideas that were related to Arianism and come out of it, but didn't have real strong sway. But it's useful to go ahead and mention them now anyway. And the first one is what's referred to as subordinationism. And again, this comes under the denial of the equality is going to lead to this idea. And the idea of subordinationism, get my tongue untangled, that basically it puts the idea that the Son was inferior or subordinate to God the Father. And this idea was kind of bantered around a little bit earlier before the full-blown Arian Trinitarian arguments that came along with it and the Christological arguments that came along here. But this was put forth by a gentleman who's considered one of the early church fathers, a gentleman named Origen. Now, some of his stuff is kind of very controversial because you kind of like, really? Did this guy know what's going on? Because of the way he handled scriptures. But he lived somewhere between 185 to 254 BC during that, or BC, AD during that time. And he advocated what's referred to as subordinationism, but that the Son was inferior to the Father in being, and that the Son eternally derives his being from the Father. Now, again, why would a guy go do that? Is he trying to cause trouble? Well, what Origen was attempting to do was to actually protect that we really do have three distinct persons. So he's not dealing with a monotheistic idea. He's trying to say, well, no, that we really do have three persons. But the Father really is the one who's the generating power, the essence. So the Son's not really quite fully God in the fullest sense. He's subordinate to the Father. Now, this is where you get the conflict between the economic Trinity of the roles and responsibilities within the Trinity versus the essence of who the persons of the Trinity are. And see, this is where those lines, and we'll get to our last lesson, we'll talk about that. That's going to really, I think, help clear up a lot of these difficulties. Now, early on, Origen's ideas were looked at. People paid attention but didn't. And really his whole thinking kind of got wiped away in the Arian controversy. And one of the other people that's really associated with it, and this is more like church history right now, is a gentleman named Athanasius. Athanasius was probably the most influential, if you will, combatant. I hate saying it that way, but he was the guy who fought very hard for Orthodox Trinitarianism against Arius. After Arius dies, he ends up being the Bishop of Alexandria, and he is a really sharp guy. He is a very clever man. He is a really good writer. He's very influential, and he's a guy who's going to deal with this subordination idea, because subordination comes along with Arianism. It's just a different form of it, that the Son is less than the Father and the Spirit also. And he is the guy who really fought from 325 on to 381, the Council of Constantinople, where you'll say it was the end of Arianism, but it really wasn't. I mean, but this was still 60 plus years of combat and difficulty. And he was a guy who really had a difficult time with the Arians. Matter of fact, this guy, I think, was exiled 5 times over 17 years because the Arian group, and this is something that's kind of sad, but we all have seen it, is all the different sides were vying for power. And if you're in the Roman Empire, and by the way, the Roman Empire is now mostly the Eastern Roman Empire, at least where these debates were going on, politics and religion weren't separated. They were the same. And the politicians affected the church, and the church reflected the state, and a whole bunch of stuff that goes in. Again, go see the church history lectures. this is where you can get exiled because the state's chasing you with the authority of the state after you, even though it's a church matter. And so we see that. And Athanasius was a guy who really, really, really fought hard against Arianism. And some people say he single-handedly saved the church from becoming Arian. Now, along with this Arianism, there's also an idea called adoptionism. Now, this is something that really didn't take on real significance. There were people who did teach it. There were places in church history where it comes up. It's more actually relevant today to where people kind of say, oh, yeah, Jesus is a good man. He has special power, God's favor, but he really is not God. He's nothing more than just sort of a special man. And the idea behind adoptionism is that Jesus, the human man, was adopted by God the Father as his son. Now, for us, we kind of like, that's kind of weird. But you have to realize that some of this stuff comes up during a time where the way you became in power, like in the Roman Empire, is somebody could say, well, you know, my son's an idiot. I don't want him in power. So I'm going to go find the best, most capable person in the empire, and I'm going to adopt him as my son. And therefore, they now have all the special privileges to become the next emperor. So that kind of thinking was not unusual during this particular time. So here the idea is Jesus at his baptism becomes, this is my beloved son. So in other words, God adopts him as his son, just as we are adopted children. They look at the same thing. Look, a man became adopted. Well, he's the firstborn, and therefore he is adopted. Well, we're also adopted. And this didn't, again, do much. But again, this is that whole idea of the equality. So in other words, the son is not equal. There has to be some subordination. So adoptionism is associated with that. And again, Athanasius fought very hard against any of these types of notions. So that kind of wraps up the idea of, are the persons of the Trinity truly and fully God? And these were some of the errant views that come along with that. Next, we're going to look at the denials that there is only one God. And that will conclude Lesson 3 when we're finished with that.